The road to Briarwood Hotel was barely visible beneath the thick blanket of fog. Olivia's eyes strained against the mist as she gripped the wheel, her fingers pale and cold. The air was heavy with an unnatural stillness, as though the world itself had taken a breath and forgotten to exhale. The hotel appeared without warning, materializing from the fog like a relic lost to time. Its cracked stone walls and darkened windows seemed to watch her approach. "We made it," she whispered, though there was no one to hear her. The radio had died miles ago, leaving her in silence for the last stretch of her journey. She parked the car and stepped out, the ground soft and damp beneath her boots. In the distance, the silhouette of the grand, weathered structure loomed like an old photograph, its details blurred by the fog but no less imposing. Others had already arrived, their cars scattered across the gravel lot in uneven rows. A figure emerged from one of the cars nearby, a man with a heavy overcoat and a hat pulled low over his eyes. He nodded briefly in her direction but said nothing as he trudged toward the entrance. Olivia slung her bag over her shoulder and followed. Inside, the air was warmer but stifling. The lobby stretched out in a long rectangle, dimly lit by a chandelier hanging precariously from the ceiling. The desk clerk, a tall woman with sharp features and hollow eyes, stood behind the reception desk as though she had been waiting for them all along. "Name?" she asked, her voice flat, emotionless. "Olivia Barnes," she replied, trying to shake off the unease that crept up her spine. She glanced around the lobby, noticing the faded floral wallpaper peeling at the corners, the thick layer of dust on the old velvet couches, and the way the light seemed to struggle to reach certain corners. "Room 5, the clerk said, sliding a heavy brass key across the counter. Olivia's fingers brushed against it, cold and solid as she pocketed the key. She hesitated, waiting for the clerk to say more, some kind of welcome perhaps, but the woman only stared at her with unsettling intensity. "Enjoy your stay," the clerk said finally, though there was no warmth in her words, only something like a warning. Olivia hurried toward the staircase, the echo of her footsteps unsettling in the quiet. The hallway on the second floor stretched endlessly, lined with identical dark wooden doors. She counted the room numbers, the faded brass plaques barely legible. Her door was at the far end of the hall, room 5. The key turned with a reluctant groan, and the door swung open. Inside, the room was simple, outdated. A single bed covered in a faded quilt, a wooden wardrobe that seemed far too big for the space, and a small window clouded with grime that offered a distorted view of the fog outside. She set her bag down and sighed. It wasn't much, but it would do for the night. Olivia pulled back the curtains and peered out the window. The fog was thicker now, clinging to the hotel's structure like a shroud. Shapes moved faintly in the distance. Other guests, she presumed, though they seemed unnaturally distorted by the mist. She watched them for a moment, her breath fogging the window before turning away. A faint knock echoed through the hall, barely perceptible. She froze, listening. Another knock, this time louder, more insistent. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway, but it was empty. The knock came again, from further down the hall, near room 7. She hesitated, her heart beating a little faster, then shook her head. "Just nerves," she whispered, closing her door and locking it behind her. Yet as she lay down, her eyes wide in the dark, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her. The fog pressed closer against the window. The next morning, Olivia woke to a strange stillness in the hotel. The fog still clung to the world outside, but the air inside felt heavy, like something unseen lingered just beneath the surface. She dressed quickly, hoping to find some sign of life in the lobby, some reassurance that the unsettling silence from the night before had just been her nerves. As she stepped into the hallway, she noticed the door to room 7 slightly ajar. The old brass key dangled from the lock, swaying gently as though someone had only just left. She paused, frowning. Room 7 had been silent the previous night, though she'd heard the knocks coming from that direction. A woman was standing near the end of the hall, her hands clutching a small suitcase, eyes darting nervously from door to door. Her pale face and the way she kept glancing back toward room 7 made Olivia uneasy. "Excuse me," Olivia said, approaching her. "Do you know who's staying in room 7? The woman jumped, clutching her suitcase tighter. I think he's gone. The man. He was there last night. I saw him check in, but now..." Olivia looked at the door, the key still swaying slightly in the lock. "Gone? Maybe he left early." The woman shook her head quickly, her lips trembling. "No one leaves Briarwood early." Before Olivia could ask what she meant, the sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the hall. The desk clerk appeared, her shoes clicking ominously against the wooden floor. Her hollow gaze fell upon them both, lingering on the open door of room 7. "Is there a problem?" she asked in that same flat, emotionless voice. Olivia gestured toward the door. "The guest in room 7. It seems like he's left, but the door's open. Should we..." "There is no guest in room 7, the clerk said sharply. Her gaze was cold like glass, and for a moment Olivia felt as though she were being stared through, not at. The woman beside her let out a nervous laugh, though there was no humor in it. "But I saw him. Last night. He checked in. Tall man, dark hair. There is no guest in room 7, the clerk repeated, her voice cutting through the woman's words like a knife. She turned her back on them and walked away, leaving Olivia standing in stunned silence. "I saw him," the woman whispered again, more to herself than to Olivia. She stared at the door for a long moment before hurrying toward the stairs, her footsteps fading quickly into the distance. Olivia stood alone in the hallway, staring at the door to room 7. A cold unease spread through her. The door remained ajar, the key still there, swaying. She stepped forward, her hand reaching for the doorknob, when a noise stopped her. A low hum, a sound so faint it was almost indistinguishable from the silence of the hotel. It seemed to vibrate through the walls, coming from somewhere deeper within the building. Olivia's hand froze on the doorknob, the strange sound buzzing in her ears. Shaking off the sudden chill that raced down her spine, she pushed the door open. The room inside was cold and dark, its curtains drawn tightly shut. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign that anyone had ever stayed there at all. The bed was neatly made, the air heavy with the faint smell of dust and something else, something faintly metallic like the scent of rain on iron. But no luggage, no clothes, no signs of occupancy. As Olivia stepped back into the hall, the door swung shut with a soft click behind her. The key had disappeared from the lock. She blinked, startled, staring at the now closed and locked door. A deep sense of unease settled over her as she turned back toward the staircase. The fog outside seemed thicker, the air colder. The hotel was swallowing its own secrets, and something told her room 7 was just the beginning. Her footsteps echoed unnaturally loud as she descended the stairs. Olivia sat in the dimly lit dining room, stirring a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The other guests sat scattered around the room, most of them silent, their faces drawn and pale. The fog pressed heavily against the tall windows, making the outside world seem impossibly far away. The disappearance of the man from room 7 lingered on her mind. No one had seen him leave. No one had come to claim the room. It was as if he had simply vanished, and no one seemed willing to talk about it. The woman who had seen him that first night had left early this morning, her footsteps quick and panicked as she fled the hotel without a word. Across the table, a man in his 50s, Leonard, he'd introduced himself, nervously tapped his fingers on the edge of his chair. His eyes flitted around the room as though waiting for something to happen. Olivia watched him, wondering if he too had sensed that something was deeply wrong in this place. "You noticed it, didn't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Olivia leaned forward. "The man in room 7? Leonard nodded, his face ashen. "He wasn't the first, you know. People have been disappearing here for years. They check in and then nothing. The hotel pretends they were never here. I've been coming here for work, staying at Briarwood once a year. I've heard stories, rumors, but I never paid attention. Not until now." His words sent a chill through her. "What do you mean?" Leonard glanced nervously toward the hallway, lowering his voice even further. "I tried to leave yesterday, just to drive into town. I was out of cigarettes, but I couldn't." Olivia frowned. "What do you mean?" "The fog," he said, his voice shaking. "It's not normal. I drove down the road for miles, but the hotel kept reappearing. Like I was going in circles. No matter which way I turned, I ended up back here." Olivia's stomach twisted. "You're saying we're trapped?" Leonard nodded, eyes wide. "I don't know how or why, but something's wrong with this place. There are others. I've heard them. Late at night, whispers in the halls. I thought it was the wind at first, but it isn't. It's them. The ones who disappeared." Olivia stiffened at his words. She thought of the strange hum she'd heard outside room 7, the faint murmur that had seemed to come from deep within the hotel's walls. At the time, she'd brushed it off, but now... Her heart pounded in her chest as a soft sound reached her ears, a faint whisper, like wind slipping through a crack. But there was no breeze here, no windows open. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing through the wooden walls. It was the same sound she'd heard the night before, but now it was unmistakably voices. Soft, incoherent whispers that grew louder, more insistent, until it felt as though they were pressing in on her from all sides. Leonard's face went pale. "Do you hear them?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Olivia nodded, her blood running cold. "What? What are they saying?" "They don't say anything," Leonard whispered. "They just whisper. All the time. Day and night." Olivia stood up, the whispering growing louder as if the walls themselves were speaking to her. She glanced toward the hallway, which now seemed darker, longer, and more oppressive. The soft murmur of voices seemed to swirl around her, carried by an unseen current. The others in the dining room sat frozen, heads down, as if pretending not to hear. "I need to know what's going on here," Olivia said, her voice more determined than she felt. "We can't just sit here and wait." Leonard shook his head frantically. "You can't fight this place. People have tried to leave before, to escape. But the hotel, it doesn't let them. It doesn't let anyone go." Olivia swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. "There has to be something. Someone who knows the truth. The staff. They're in on it," Leonard hissed, his eyes wild. "The desk clerk, the maids. Everyone. They know, but they won't talk. They just let people disappear, and then pretend like nothing happened. Olivia looked toward the hallway, where the whispers seemed to be coming from. Her mind raced. She had to find out where those voices were coming from, where the missing guests had gone. The hotel was hiding something, and she couldn't just sit here and wait to be the next one to vanish. "I'm going to find out what's happening," she said, her voice steady now, "before it's too late." Leonard didn't follow as she left the dining room. The whispers grew louder, their incoherent voices twisting through the halls, pulling her deeper into the heart of Briarwood Hotel. The deeper Olivia ventured into the hotel, the more the air felt wrong. It clung to her skin, heavy and damp, like the mist outside. The whispers ebbed and flowed, sometimes falling silent, only to return louder, more urgent, as if guiding her somewhere she shouldn't go. She followed them, driven by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. The hallways seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting in ways that defied the hotel's layout. As she rounded another corner, she came upon something that made her heart skip a beat. A door, unlike the others, stood at the end of the hall. Unlike the guest rooms with their weathered wooden doors and brass numbers, this one was iron and imposing, with no markings to suggest what lay behind it. The whispers seemed to thicken in the air around it, their intensity suffocating. Olivia approached it cautiously, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. It was cold to the touch, but when she tried to turn it, the door didn't budge. She leaned in, pressing her ear against the cool metal. From behind the door came a sound, faint but distinct. A soft tapping, irregular, like fingernails lightly rapping against stone. The sound sent a chill up her spine and she stepped back. The door looked ancient, older than the rest of the hotel, its iron frame thick with rust and age. There was no keyhole, no obvious way to open it. The whispers intensified, swirling around her, pressing in on her mind. They seemed to urge her to leave, to run, but something kept her rooted there. There was a terrible sense of purpose in that door, as though it was the heart of the hotel's secrets. Suddenly, a voice broke through the haze of whispers, clear and urgent. "What are you doing?" It was Leonard. His voice was thin with fear as he hurried down the hallway, his eyes wide with panic. He grabbed her arm and pulled her back from the door. "You shouldn't be here." "I heard something," Olivia whispered, her eyes fixed on the door. "Behind it. There's someone, or something, inside." Leonard shook his head vehemently. "No, that door isn't for us. No one's supposed to go near it. It's been locked for as long as I've known this place." Olivia turned to face him, her curiosity burning through her fear. "What's behind it?" "I don't know," Leonard admitted, his voice trembling. "But I've heard things. People talking in hushed tones. Guests disappearing near that door, just like the man in room 7. Whatever's in there, it's dangerous. It's part of this place. Part of why people vanish." She stared at him, her pulse quickening. "Then we need to open it. We need to know what's behind it." Leonard's face paled. "No, we can't. The staff." He broke off, his eyes darting nervously down the hallway. "The staff will stop us. They don't want anyone knowing. They protect this place." Before Olivia could argue, a soft creak echoed through the hall. They both turned toward the source of the sound, their hearts pounding. The door, the iron door, seemed to shudder slightly. The whispers around them intensified, now a cacophony of soft voices urging them to leave, but Olivia couldn't tear her eyes away from the door. Then, abruptly, the door fell silent. Leonard took a step back, his breathing shallow. We need to go. Now. But Olivia wasn't ready to leave. She knew this door held the answers. Answers to the whispers, to the disappearances, to the dark history of the hotel. There has to be a way to open it, she said, her voice hushed but resolute. A key. Something. Leonard shook his head again, more forcefully this time. If there's a key, the staff has it. But even if you find it, you don't want to know what's behind that door. Trust me. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from down the hall. Both Olivia and Leonard stiffened, their eyes widening. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, drawing closer with each passing second. Without a word, Leonard grabbed Olivia's arm and pulled her down a side corridor. They ducked into a small alcove as the footsteps reached the iron door. Peeking around the corner, Olivia caught a glimpse of the desk clerk, the tall woman with the hollow eyes, standing in front of the door. In her hand, she held a heavy iron key, the same dark, ancient metal as the door itself. The clerk paused for a moment, listening. Olivia's breath caught in her throat as she watched, waiting for the clerk to turn and spot them. But the woman didn't look their way. Instead, she gently placed her hand against the door as if feeling for something beyond it. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away, the iron key disappearing into her long coat. The hallway was silent again, but the iron door loomed behind them, darker and more ominous than before. "We need that key," Olivia whispered, her determination hardening. Leonard stared at her in disbelief. "You're mad." But Olivia wasn't listening anymore. The iron door held the truth, and she wasn't leaving without it. The basement was colder than the rest of the hotel, the air damp and stale. Olivia had slipped away from Leonard the moment they returned to the lobby, her mind already racing. She knew she had to find more, something concrete. Something that explained what was happening here. The whispers, the locked door, the disappearances. It was all connected. And if the staff had the key to that door, it meant they knew the truth. The clerk had vanished after her strange visit to the iron door. But Olivia had seen the basement door at the far end of the hotel, hidden in a shadowy alcove, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Now, she stood at the top of the narrow staircase, her heart pounding in her chest as she descended into the dark. The basement was cluttered, filled with forgotten furniture, cracked mirrors, and boxes covered in dust and cobwebs. It smelled of mildew and age, a place long forgotten by the hotel's surface world. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the occasional drip of water from somewhere deep within the building's foundation. But Olivia could feel it, that underlying sense of unease that she had come to know so well. She moved carefully, her footsteps soft against the stone floor. The basement felt endless, with walls that seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways, just like the hallways upstairs. As she walked, something caught her eye. A large, leather-bound book sitting on a broken table. It seemed out of place amidst the decay, untouched by dust, as though it had been waiting for her. Olivia approached the book cautiously. Its cover was cracked with age, the leather brittle under her fingertips. There was no title, only a strange, faded symbol pressed into the surface, a symbol that stirred something deep in her memory. She opened it slowly, the pages yellowed and fragile. Scrawled in dark ink were the words that made her blood run cold. The history of Briarwood Hotel. Her breath caught. She turned the pages, her fingers trembling. The first entry was dated nearly a century ago. In 1923, Briarwood Hotel opened its doors to the public. Built on the ruins of the Briar Estate, It promised comfort and luxury for travelers. But even in its early years, strange occurrences plagued the guests. Missing items, doors that would lock on their own, and guests who vanished without a trace. Olivia swallowed hard, her eyes scanning the pages. Each entry seemed to spiral deeper into darkness. 1931. 3 guests reported strange sounds from the third-floor hallway. By morning, none of them were found. The staff maintained their innocence, but the hotel's reputation began to suffer. Investigations led nowhere. The hotel seemed alive. The whispers around her seemed to grow louder as she read on, their strange, disjointed murmur now almost familiar, like a language just beyond her understanding. 1945. The Briarwood was purchased by new owners, though its history remained unspeakable. They too vanished, like those before them. Locals claim the land is cursed, but it is more than just the land. The hotel feeds. It takes... Her heart raced as the journal's tone shifted, the handwriting more erratic, the words more hurried. 1960. The disappearances continue. Guests check in but never leave. There are whispers about a locked door, a door that should never be opened. It holds the secrets of the hotel, the reason for its hunger. But no one can find the key. The hotel hides it, keeps it close. It knows. A chill ran down Olivia's spine as she reached the final entry. The handwriting had become barely legible, a frenzied scrawl of madness. 1975. The last owner tried to open the door. She failed. The hotel consumed her, just as it did the others. There is no escape. The Briarwood cannot be left, cannot be escaped. The guests belong to it now. They are part of it. The door. The entry ended abruptly. Olivia stared at the half-finished sentence, her mind whirling. The hotel consumed its guests. It fed on them, trapping them in its walls, taking their lives, their souls. The whispers weren't just ghosts. They were the voices of those who had vanished, their existence absorbed into the very fabric of the building. She slammed the book shut, her hands trembling. It all made sense now. The endless hallways, the fog that wouldn't let them leave, the locked door. The hotel was alive and it was hungry. Suddenly, the room around her seemed darker, colder. The whispers were louder now, insistent, echoing through the basement walls. Olivia backed away from the table, her eyes darting around the room. It felt like the hotel was watching her, aware of her discovery. In the distance, she heard footsteps descending the stairs. Her heart leaped into her throat. She grabbed the book and hurried toward a shadowy corner, hiding behind a stack of dusty crates. The footsteps grew louder, and she held her breath, peering through a crack between the boxes. It was the desk clerk again, her face as emotionless as ever. She moved with slow, deliberate steps, heading straight for the table where Olivia had found the book. The clerk's eyes scanned the room, her movements unnaturally still, as if listening for something Olivia couldn't hear. Olivia gripped the book tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't stay hidden here forever. She needed to leave, needed to find a way to escape this place before it took her too. But the locked door lingered in her mind. It was the key to everything. Whatever was behind it. That's where the real answers lay. And now, she had to find a way to open it. The hotel was darker than ever before, the air heavy with the weight of countless lives lost within its walls. Olivia clutched the old journal tightly against her chest as she hurried through the winding corridors, her every step echoed by the faint whispers that never left her ears. The final entry in the journal played over and over in her mind. The hotel feeds. There is no escape. She was the last guest. Leonard had disappeared earlier that day. She'd gone to find him, but his room was empty, his suitcase gone, the bed neatly made as though he had never been there. She knew the truth. The hotel had taken him, just as it had taken the others. Now, Olivia was alone. The fog outside had thickened to the point of suffocation, the windows nearly opaque with its dense gray tendrils. There was no leaving. No one would come to help. The only way forward was through that door, the locked iron door that the hotel guarded so fiercely. She reached the 3rd floor, her footsteps faltering as she approached the iron door once more. The air around it seemed thicker, colder. It felt as though the door was watching her, waiting. The key. She had to find the key. The desk clerk had it. She'd seen the woman with it just hours before, disappearing into the shadows like some wraith haunting the halls. Olivia's breath came in short gasps as she pushed forward. She rounded the corner, stopping abruptly as she spotted the desk clerk at the far end of the hallway. The woman stood perfectly still, her back to Olivia, her long coat billowing slightly, as though moved by a breeze that didn't exist. For a moment, neither of them moved. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest, her mouth dry with fear. The clerk's hand twitched, and Olivia knew she had to act now. Before she could think, her feet moved, carrying her silently forward. The whispers surged around her, growing frantic, as though they too knew what she was about to do. The clerk never turned. Olivia's hand shot out, grabbing the heavy iron key from the pocket of the woman's coat. She expected the clerk to react, to spin around, to stop her. But nothing happened. The clerk remained frozen, her face hidden beneath her hair, as though she had become a part of the hotel itself. Clutching the key tightly, Olivia backed away, her heart racing. The key was cold, its weight heavy in her hand. She didn't wait to see what the clerk would do next. She turned and ran back to the iron door, the whispers screaming now, rising to a fever pitch. They no longer sounded like faint echoes. They were voices, crying out, pleading with her to stop. She reached the door and jammed the key into the lock. It turned with a loud metallic groan, and the door swung open with a deep, echoing creak. The air that rushed out from behind it was thick, stale, and suffused with a strange, metallic smell. It was darker beyond the door than she had anticipated, the shadows almost alive, shifting and twisting like a living thing. Taking a deep breath, Olivia stepped inside. The room beyond was vast, far larger than seemed possible. The walls were lined with old, cracked mirrors, each reflecting her image back at her, distorted and wrong. In the center of the room stood an old, crumbling stone altar. The surface was stained with something dark, almost black, and Olivia's stomach churned at the sight. The whispers were deafening now, rising and falling in a chaotic hum. And then she saw them. Figures, barely visible in the shadows, their shapes flickering in and out of focus. They were watching her, dozens of them, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Olivia recognized some of them. Leonard, the man from room 7. Others she hadn't met but had heard in the hallways. The missing guests. They weren't gone. They were here, trapped within the hotel, absorbed into its very essence. The realization struck Olivia with a sickening finality. The hotel didn't just make people disappear, it consumed them, made them part of its endless cycle. The iron door had never been a gateway to escape or answers. It was the heart of the Briarwood Hotel's curse, a place where the line between life and death blurred, where those who entered were doomed to remain forever. The figures shifted, their eyes fixed on her, their expressions vacant, drained of all life. Olivia took a step back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had to leave, had to get out before the hotel claimed her too. But as she turned to flee, the iron door slammed shut with a resounding crash, the key gone from the lock. The room around her pulsed with a strange, rhythmic thrum, as though the walls themselves were alive, breathing. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, closing in on her from all sides. Panic surged through her, and she rushed to the door, pounding on it, screaming for help. But there was no one left to hear her. The hotel had taken them all. As the shadows crept closer, the whispers became a single voice, clear and cold, reverberating through her mind. You belong to the Briarwood now. Olivia's screams echoed through the empty halls, mingling with the voices of those who had come before her. The hotel had claimed its final guest. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the silence returned. The Briarwood Hotel stood alone in the fog, its windows dark and silent, waiting for its next visitor to check in.